event today. We're very happy that you're all here in Glasgow and also to our viewers online. We will talk about the implementation of the Paris Agreement's third long-term goal, which aims at making finance flows consistent with a pathway towards low greenhouse gas emissions and a climate-resilient development. Development finance institutions such as national development banks and multilateral development banks play a crucial role in this regard. And public development banks' annual activity amounts to $2.2 trillion of investments, representing over 10% of global investments annually. So MDBs and public development banks committed to align their activities already in 2017 with the Paris Agreement. And we want to today discuss where this process is actually at now. And we will start with a keynote by Paul Watkinson, Senior Advisor to the French Delegation. Paul, we're very happy to have you here as a speaker and to give your insights on how the Paris Agreement goal was negotiated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the good afternoon to everybody, and thank you for the invitation to say a few words at the opening of this side event. If I go back, I've been part of this process in the UNFCCC for far too long, more than 2 decades now. And if I go back to the earlier days, we had a long debate on finance, which was almost always seen as how much money is on the table to support action in developing countries. It is an essential part of the balance we found. It's an essential part of making the convention work, and then the Kyoto Protocol, and now the Paris Agreement. So it's been an essential part of our work for a long, long time. But I think it was seen in rather simplistic terms in our negotiations for a long, long time about essentially how much money is in a fund on the table. And we've moved, and that was a part of it. We developed much more. And obviously the agreement we finally reached in sketch form in Copenhagen and then in decision form in Cancun to create a green climate fund, to create a standing committee on finance to help us deal with these issues, to have an overview on financial flows, was a key step in allowing us to work much more on this question of finance under the convention at the time. But when we came to negotiate the Paris Agreement, it was also clear that the financial component was going to be a much wider part of what we needed to put together to get the Paris Agreement in place and to make it deliver over time. And so what became the section on finance, but also what became Article 2.1c, were very important parts of our preparation. Now, if I look at how those came together, first of all, let's put it in the context of the wider objectives of the Paris Agreement, because it does 4 things. It sets the cap, where we're going, the direction of travel, well under 2 degrees, and above all, 1.5 degrees. And that is increasingly seen as a reference, I think, by all countries and all actors on climate change. That is a very, very powerful thing. We, of course, let governments set their own targets, the nationally determined contributions, but we also put in place centralized rules to track, to have transparency, and to know what is happening, and to raise ambition regularly over time. But we also put in place a very large block, which is around cooperation and collaboration, including areas around the more traditional parts of public finance, the role of green climate funds and many other actors, but also the wider mobilization of cooperation and collaboration, including what we put in the action agenda and now the Marrakesh Partnership. So within that, the place of finance and transforming financial flows was a very important part of our consideration. And I think the first thing we did when putting this together was to decide that this should actually be an objective, what the Paris Agreement should help deliver. It shouldn't simply be parties shall transform financial flows. That would be a very nice thing to say, but it's not very operational. It's at the aim, one of the aims itself of the agreement is to bring about making the financial flows consistent with this low greenhouse gas and climate resilient development. Now, putting it in that term was a very deliberate choice we made. We made it during the second week as the agreement was coming into it was getting clearer and clearer how it would work. And it was not intended just to highlight the importance of this, but as I say, all of the action in the agreement, all of the type of actions countries are taking, all of the actions that the collaboration around there is making between the multiple actors, not just states, but the other partners, non-state actors, but other operators, is contributing to that as a goal. I think that is where we are now. How do we make this truly operational? And that's why I find it very, very rewarding what you're doing here in this initiative, the workshop, this event and the others you're organizing this afternoon, very much looking at how the multilateral financial institutions, as you say, the development banks, bilateral, national, the multilateral, are really working to make this, put this at the heart of their operations. So what began as one of the shortest bits of text in the Paris Agreement, it's 1.5 lines. I think it is now about making that real in your actions, in the way you're implementing it, through your cooperation, through the methodologies you're putting in so that you can really understand that, and turning it into the real financial support that you're providing. So we're going from the early days in what I would call rhetoric of our negotiations. We need more support, we need more action, to the days when we started putting some concrete tools such as the Green Climate Fund and the Standing Committee, to now really looking at making this operational across the board. And of course, it's not only what you are doing in the field of public finance, it's also in private finance, really aligning that private investment also. And that's where the public investment that you are mobilizing through networks such as IDFC, through all the members that you have, and their operations and their decisions are also having this huge influence on where private investment is going to go as well. So this is taking us, as I say, from this early declarations of need to something which can really drive that transformation. And it's in there because it links back to our goals, and ultimately the goal of keeping warming to 1.5 degrees and enabling us to make that transition to that low net zero by the mid-century, and also, of course, resilience, because that is a vital part of what we have to do. Thank you for the chance to say a few words this afternoon.
Thank you, Paul, so much for your introduction to this, a very complicated but also very interesting topic. And I would hand over to Aki Kachi, who will present I think it's first Aki, but we'll see how it works with this with the slides. Next slide, please. Can we see? Maybe. Sorry. Next. Oh, sorry. Then there was a mix-up with the presentations, and that's why I would hand over first to Aki and then to Alice.
Yes, thank you for that introduction. And I think that's also, I share this comment that this third 2.1c is really very special about the Paris Agreement. And it's not enough that we have a temperature target and a resilience adaptation target, but really, in order to actually achieve those targets, we need to think and rethink the entire financial system and really the whole global economy. And so within the framework of a project that we're working on, supported by the German Development Ministry, and supported by them, but obviously they don't necessarily share all of our views about everything. We've been accompanying the DFI, the MDB, and the IDFC process for a number of years now. We've been commenting on their methodologies for direct alignment of their direct finance for mitigation and adaptation. And really the next step that they've been coming along with is intermediated finance, and what do you do about the counterparties, and how do you evaluate who you should work with? And intermediated finance is really a challenge because it's flowing through many different kinds of financial instruments, to many different kinds of financial intermediaries, sometimes through multiple financial intermediaries, through multiple sub-projects, and you don't necessarily always know exactly what the end use of the finance is going to be, and also what kind of impact am I having on my counterparty in working with them. But so basically, because you cannot impose your own criteria that you may have on direct lending, it really calls for a different, more holistic approach in terms of evaluating how you go about doing this. I think for us, it's really clear that ring fencing and earmarking is really not enough. If it were enough, we could really only think about the direct, for the MDBs, the building block 1 and 2 approaches. But considering that capital is fungible and a lot of green finance is done on more concessional terms, you're affecting the overall cost of capital in your financial intermediary that you're working with. And in effect, you were subsidizing all of their activities. And so this demands a shift towards an understanding of a whole counterparty approach and a whole under approach to due diligence and knowing your customer. And a lot of financial intermediaries and financial DFIs are already doing this, but it needs to go much, much further. And just to give you a sense of how important this is to do, really a large proportion of finance that DFIs mobilize actually is going through financial intermediaries in the countries that they work with. For a number of countries, for a number of banks, it's actually a larger proportion than the direct financing flows. And to that extent, it really poses a large challenge to the Paris alignment of the DFI portfolios. And really, when a bank cannot call itself Paris aligned without considering what it's doing through its financial intermediary activities. We propose 4 dimensions of Paris alignment through FIs, and that means 4 dimensions of what we look at towards an FI when assessing whether they are Paris aligned. And to be honest, I mean, most DFIs themselves are not there, so this is really a journey. I think there's minimum criteria that we need to establish in order to even see we're going to have a relationship. But ideally, it's a partnership where the DFI and the partner intermediary in whatever country are going to grow together, and there's also a capacity building question along that journey. I'm going to focus on briefly mitigation and governance and more transparency here, just for brevity, but it doesn't mean that adaptation and resilience is not the focus, is not important. And I think it's telling that right now we have an exclusion list for a number of ESG issues in a number of DFIs. Climate is often not very prominent on that list. There's some mentions of logging and forests, but often it's more about other social issues. And we really need an updating of a lot of these exclusion lists to encompass much more of the climate component. One other thing to mention is that often these exclusion lists apply much more to the direct finance, and then the criteria for financial intermediated finance is often much, much thinner. In terms of transparency, we need to actually know if our partners are fulfilling their promises, or if it's a journey to fulfill the promises, that they're on their way and making progress in doing that. And I think the TCFD provides some of an approach about how to do that, but also the TCFD is in its early stages. And I think it's very interesting to note that the countries or banks that have, in the private sector, that have volunteered for the TCFD are still on that journey of learning how to report that and disclose that for their own portfolios. And of some of the largest banks in the world that have volunteered for this, there really have very few banks that have actually done this so far. And recent research coming out of the University of Zurich finds that a lot of these firms are cherry picking and reporting primarily non-material climate risk information. So there's really a high learning curve, not only for the private sector, for public sector banks, but all financial intermediaries in general. This doesn't mean that the framework is not good. It just means that it needs to be standardized, mandatory, and really mainstreamed. But basically, based on an assessment of a potential financial intermediary, we find that there may be different categories of cooperation that one might suggest. If the FI is really not ready to commit to any kind of Paris alignment, then obviously one shouldn't work with them. But depending on where they are on this journey in terms of Paris alignment, one can move along this spectrum from perhaps Paris-aligned SPVs for low and medium risk clients, together with technical assistance, onto sort of more general lines of equity and direct equity. But it really, one needs to be careful about what kind of counterparties we're working with. And that all starts with a commitment and a shift with technical assistance, capacity building, and due diligence and transparency. And just very briefly, I want to highlight a very interesting example from the private sector, which I found actually very encouraging. Alecta is a large Swedish pension fund, and they learned that they were participating in a large green bond fund that, run by Amundi. Amundi was considering buying a green bond from the State Bank of India, which is also involved with financing a large coal mine in Australia through the Amundi group, Adani group. And this concern prompted the CEO of Alecta to speak to the CEO of Amundi and say, this is a major issue, you need to speak to the State Bank of India because we don't want to be buying green bonds from a financial institution that's financing one of the largest coal mines in the world. This is a problem that can't be in this fund. I don't care what the criteria of the green bond is, but our due diligence in terms of what our green bonds do and with whom we work with means that we can't work with them. They're not the only one. There are a number of other asset owners and asset managers that have said this, and it led to Amundi not buying the green bond from the State Bank of India, and this is an approach that a number of development banks and DFIs have not yet mainstreamed in their work. I mean, I think there's a lot of finance flowing in this direction in a lot of good directions, and the finance that the World Bank Group, the EIB, and the KfW have mobilized for the State Bank of India is earmarked for good things, renewable energy and energy efficiency, but there is still a lack of sense of what the whole entire counterparty is doing. And so, yeah, there's quite a ways to go still on this journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Aki, so much for your presentation on counterparty alignment, or a framework for that. And now over to Alice, who will present a framework for the authorization of the IDFC members.
Thank you very much, Alexandra, and thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Aki, as well for your insights on what is today one of the key frontiers of alignment and what will be a key area of work for financial institutions who committed to Paris alignment. I will now present you what is and what aims to contribute to the concrete implementation of IDFC commitment for Paris alignment. As indicated by Paul in his keynote speech, there is a need now for IDFC members as well as all financial institutions to walk the talk and now move towards the implementation of these Paris alignment commitments. So As many of you already know, IDFC members have been very much committed to support mitigation and adaptation for a number of years right now. But in 2017, they're also committed to be Paris aligned and to make financial flows consistent with the Paris Agreement goals. They did that in partnership with the MDBs, the Multilateral Development Banks. And this implies that in addition to their support for mitigation and adaptation, they will aim to maximize their contribution and really aim to have the most impact possible for the transition of economies and society, as well as also ensure that all of their operations and activities do no significant harm for mitigation and adaptation. So of course, this implies that they will have to implement a very comprehensive strategic process internally, as they will need to adapt internal priorities and procedures to make all of their activities consistent with the Paris Agreement objectives. And they will also need to support the transformation of activities and value chains across all sectors and countries. So Paris alignment is a journey for IDFC members as well as for all financial institutions. And this is a journey that will be different from one financial institution to another. Indeed, there is no one-size-fits-all approach for Paris alignment, and a tailored combination of tools and approaches will be needed. And IDFC members will have to adapt them depending on their mandate and the countries in which they operate. So we developed this tool together with New Climate Institute, with this objective of really supporting IDFC members in the operationalization of this Paris alignment commitment. And to do that, we actually took the 6 principles of Paris alignment that were adopted by IDFC members in 2018, and we provided some key recommendations about what each of these 6 principles imply concretely at the strategic, at the operational, and at the country level. And then we also tried to identify the different tools and approaches that may be used to implement each of these 6 principles. So if I just provide you a quick overview of this operationalization framework, I very much encourage you to have a look, because it's a very comprehensive report with many information, and we really encourage all financial institutions, even if they are not an IDFC members, to take a look at. They could find useful guidance for implementing Paris alignment. But just if I provide a quick overview of what is included in this operationalization framework, taking, for example, the principle 1, which is increasingly mobilize finance and climate action. Indeed, the support for climate mitigation and adaptation activities will be critical, and climate finance is one essential element to reach Paris Agreement goals. So IDFC members will need in the coming years to really aim to maximize their own contribution to Paris Agreement. So this means that at the strategic level, they will need to have clear targets in order to really maximize their contribution for the decarbonization and the adaptation of economies and societies. And they should also, in addition to all of these targets for increasing their impact, they should also make sure that they also have targets to make sure that all of their financial flows are also consistent with the Paris Agreement objectives. And in addition to that, they will need to adapt different tools and assessment methodologies to also ensure that they are able to make sound investment decisions that really aim to maximize impact towards this transformation of economies and societies. So if you can see directly on the operationalization framework, you will find a list of all the different tools and approaches that may be used towards these objectives. So this may include, for example, at the strategic level, the adoption of a specific climate finance targets. A number of IDFC members already have one. But this may also include adopting qualitative or impact objectives as well. This also implies at the more strategic level having a clear definition of what adaptation finance is, of what mitigation finance is, and reporting for climate finance. The second principle that was released by IDFC is around the support for country-led climate-related policies. And indeed, with their public mandate, IDFC members are in a unique position to really support the development and the implementation of country-driven strategies to really contribute to the Paris Agreement objectives. And so in order to do that, IDFC members will need to ensure that their strategies and assessment framework are adapted and respond to investment need of country partners. And they will need as well to develop and use a number of new tools and facilities to support the countries with the development and implementation of these climate goals. Moving now to Principle 3. Principle 3 is around the mobilization of private finance, and this will be key as well if we want to achieve the levels that are required to meet the Paris Agreement objectives. And to really contribute to this objective, IDFC members can build on the key role that they can play in understanding and really bridging the local and international private sector's interests and needs. And they can, to do that, they can prioritize and develop a number of instruments and facilities to build capacity and leverage private capital to support these climate objectives. So this can be achieved, for example, by adopting a private finance mobilization target at the strategic level, but also by the development of, by the use and development of tools such as green credit lines, guarantees, and other risk-sharing mechanisms. If we move now to Principle 4, around the recognition of the importance of adaptation and resilience, especially in the most vulnerable countries. So it is, first of all, important to keep in mind that all countries will need to adapt to a changing climate, and that IDFC members can play an important role in really supporting these adaptation efforts in the countries in which they are operating. So it will be important as well for IDFC members to support countries, but also to ensure that they really foster the resilience of all the activities and actors with which they are operating. So to be Paris aligned, they will need to really take the local, national, and regional context into account when developing these strategies and assessment framework to really promote adaptation and resilience. And they will have as well to mainstream adaptation and resilience consideration in all of their operations. So today, most of the different strategies and tools that are available mostly include rely on a risk assessment framework, physical risk assessment at the project level, but also at the portfolio level and at the country level. If we look now at Principle 5, with Principle 5, IDFC members have committed to support the transition away from a development model dependent on fossil fuels, as well as to prioritize actions that will indirectly support this shift. So in order to achieve this, they will have to develop strategies and assessment framework to assess and support the decarbonization of energy supply and use as well across all sectors. And when doing that, they will need to also take the national context into account, as well as the level of ambition of the Paris Agreement mitigation goal. So this will imply really to mainstream energy transition considerations into all daily operations. So around this principle, it is interesting that, for example, MDBs, as well as other financial institutions, are differentiating between the screening tool that will aim to really assess the financial risk related to the transition of economies and societies at different levels, project, counterparties, or country level, but also that aim to identify the consistency in terms of real economy with the Paris Agreement mitigation objective. So here we also see that new tools such as decision trees may be used, for example, to also assess really the consistency with mitigation objectives. And finally, the final principle for this Paris alignment framework is around the internal transformation of the institution, and this will be key for IDFC members, as they will need to really transform their institution, to really change also the mindset of their institution, to really have it at the core of the financial institution. So one of the first steps will be around the review of the compatibility of the institution's mandate with the Paris Agreement objective. And it will be key as well to have the senior management make institutional commitment towards Paris alignment. And a second step will be, of course, the adjustment and adaptation of all the incentive structures and support system internally. So I will leave it there. And yeah, I very much encourage you to have a look at this operationalization framework, which include the review and recommendation on all the different tools that are already available and that can help IDFC members, but also other financial institutions, start the alignment journey today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alice. And now we want to move to our panel discussion, where we want to discuss with IDFC members where they actually currently are at their journey. So for this, I would kindly ask you to free the seats for our panelists. Thank you both so much, and we encourage you also to then engage in the discussion afterwards, of course. We would value your expertise, definitely. So we have Alexis Bonnel from the French Development Agency. Hello, Alexis. We have Julio Leite from the Brazilian Development Bank. And we have also an online panelist. I hope we can see him as well. Yes, perfect. We have Alexander von Kapher from the KfW in Germany. And we are maybe also having another panelist, Zazondi from the Development Bank of Southern Africa, joining us a bit later, maybe, hopefully, we'll see. So thank you all so much for being here. And we maybe want to start with the first question of where we stand in the operationalization process of the Paris alignment, and wanted to start with the AFD. So what is the AFD currently undertaking to operationalize Paris alignment? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, and many thanks also for all the think tank effort that is building up on this important topic. This is extremely useful for us as we move forward in the implementation of Paris alignment and the related ambitions. So maybe I would like to start by telling you a few words of where we stand in our alignment journey. And I don't know if we could bring a slide up on the screen, if that's possible. And I don't know if there's a clicker somewhere, or yes, if there is. There it is. So I will take control from now on. Okay. So I was, just as a quick introduction, I just wanted to build up on what Paul mentioned at the beginning of the session, telling the story of how the financial issues started being addressed in the negotiations, and starting with sometimes very simple approaches, but it was a beginning, and then it became much more ambitious and therefore also complex, probably. And this is exactly what we have experienced within the AFD. When we started our alignment journey, well, first of all, I should say it's a never-ending, everlasting process. So there's an arrow up there. I don't know if that one is the end. We'll see. And it is not either a linear process. It's a bumpy road. And when we started, what we tried to do, that was in the mid-2000s, 2005, 2007, the first climate strategies of AFD, we were focusing on doing good things, meaning implementing a project-based approach where we were looking for projects that would generate climate co-benefits. And that was it. That was the center of our climate strategy back in 2005, 2007. And for this to happen and to be followed and to be accountable for that, we were developing technical and economic tools. We were putting together quantitative assessments, particularly the assessment of carbon footprints of the projects we were financing. But in the end, although this is still very useful, of course, and all of what I will say is cumulative, it's not either or, but it still was quite fragmented thinking, focusing on projects that were doing good. And if you look back at the annual reports of the time, you would see many nice pictures of wind farms and renewable energy projects and so on. We still have them in our annual reports, but that was the basis for our climate focus. And then slowly but surely we realized that maybe that was not enough, and we needed to move from doing good things to doing things right, meaning that we would start implementing a wider approach at the portfolio level, focusing to start with the use of proceeds and the projects for which we knew what our finance was being used for, and this is where we started looking at alignment and longer-term considerations also in assessing the quality of our activities vis-à-vis climate change and the Paris Agreement. And in this regard, this is when we started moving from targets in terms of climate finance for the amount of finance that generates climate co-benefits to additional targets on making sure that the entire portfolio is compatible with the objectives of the Paris Agreement. And this is when we added to a target of 50% of our finance that generates climate co-benefits to an additional target of making sure that all of what we finance is indeed compatible and does no harm to the Paris alignment, to the Paris Agreement goals. And then the next step in this journey has been to look also at not only the climate situation of the projects that we finance where we can when we know what the use of proceeds are, but we also started looking at something that was a loophole in our approach, which is looking at all the non-earmarked finance that we are providing through credit lines, non-earmarked to financial intermediaries, but it could also be corporate funding or budget support. You don't always have a precise knowledge of where this finance that you are providing is going to, and this is when we started looking at counterpart alignment. And I could say that somehow this is when we started implementing also a whole of institution approach, trying to really integrate climate in all the areas where we work and have it embedded as a lens through which we consider strategies, activities, and operating modalities. I would say this is basically where we stand now, but we see further steps in this journey. And maybe in the second part of the session, we will be able to get into more of that. But we feel the need to move from a situation where we try to do things right according to this whole of institution approach and a wider portfolio approach, and try to do the right things. And what does that mean? This means understanding that when we are operating in a system. It's not only about us and about us being aligned, it's also about understanding where we are intervening and what are the others in this system doing, and trying to find the best positioning possible, the best tools possible to contribute to a systems approach of progressing towards more alignment. And I would say this is the next frontier in our approach that we're starting to investigate these days. And this implies moving from counterpart alignment because we cannot follow the use of proceeds. And this is how we entered this space, looking at financial intermediaries and the alignment of those intermediaries as counterparts, because we were not able to understand where exactly the finance that we were providing to them was going to, and therefore we could not assess the use of proceeds alignment. But moving from that perspective to an even broader perspective, realizing that it certainly is important to have a better understanding of the level of alignment of our counterparts, simply because they are our counterparts, and that we need to have a clear understanding of where we are intervening in the financial chain when we are providing finance in a given to a given counterpart that is part of a chain. And this goes way beyond looking at those who are receiving finance from us. It should also imply down the road having a look also at those who are providing resources to us. And we understand that some development banks are moving forward in this space. For instance, EIB recently, last week, released an approach on an overall counterpart framework, and this is the type of things that we are also exploring these days, building on financial intermediary alignment approaches. And let me just say that this type of ambition in the alignment journey is represents a huge change and a huge ambition, a new ambition, because it implies having also a better understanding of the political economy in which you are operating. If you start assessing the level of alignment of all of those you work with in a financial chain, if you start reflecting on doing the right things, what does it mean, right? Everybody in the financial chain has an interpretation of what right means. And having an analysis of that political economy is also something that we are increasingly interested in. It also implies a small revolution in terms of accountability frameworks, because in this space, the classic quantitative assessments are not good enough to give you information about where you stand, and you need more qualitative assessments, particularly on the political economy side. And how are you accountable for that? How can you make sure that you're making progress on that? I think this is yet another think tank territory type of question that would tremendously help us have better tools to also account for this qualitative part of the story. And down the road, all of this would imply having an extended vision of our corporate social responsibility if we start getting interested into the system in which we are operating beyond what we are doing or what we are doing with our counterparts. We are not in that space yet. This is a space we are just starting to scratch the surface of this. But I wanted to mention that as part of a journey, there are things coming up, and today we are focusing more on the alignment of counterparts and particularly financial intermediaries. And I would say that this focus today is at about here in this journey, and this is probably where I think AFD, for instance, is standing today. I think there's a second round of questions where I will be able to say a little more precisely about what AFD is doing based on the operationalization framework that was presented just now by Alice. So maybe I'll stop there for now.
Thank you so much, Alexis, for presenting where the AFD stands currently. I would want to hand over to Julio Leite from the BNDES.
Hello, good. Are you listening to me? Okay, just take out this earphone. So thanks so much, IDFC, for the invitation for BNDES to speak in this panel, and I compliment my colleague as well, and my virtual colleagues and my presential colleagues. As the member of AFD just said, is a journey, right? So it's a long journey, and BNDES has more than 40 years of this journey since the bank has created this social environmental unity in the bank. So we are the first bank in Brazil to create an environmental unity dedicated to understand at that time the effects of the environmental operations of the bank in the social environmental agenda. And then the progress of the bank has been moving forward towards the climate agenda. So we kind of try to split the problems into three great sections. The first one is where the funding comes from, so the capital mobilization, so how the banks can access concessional fundings, grants from other parties to support our projects. The other part is the projects itself, so which projects we are willing to support, and what's the assessments of the projects that we do for supporting these projects. And the last part is transparency. So the policies, internal policies, and the transparency. So if you go to the first part, the capital mobilization, we in Brazil, we were the first bank to issue a green bond in 2017. $1 billion, mostly to fund the renewables energy sector in Brazil, wind power sector in Brazil. We were also the first bank in Brazil as well, the first financial institution to issue a green note last year, also to fund renewables energy in Brazil. So the renewables in Brazil is a very curious history in Brazil, because 10 years ago, you had 0% of our power energy matrix counted the wind power. And then today, as of today, we have also from 15 to 20%. So it was a 10-year program, very fast and very well supported by the bank. So that's one thing I would like to mention. So going to the capital mobilization, we have the green bonds, the green notes. We are the manager of the Brazil Climate Fund, which is a climate fund funded by the federal government to support projects in that will deliver the cutting of emissions. We are also have been accredited by the Green Climate Fund 2 years ago, and we are applying to make the first round of investments by GCF in Brazil. But we, since last year, we are mainly focusing and trying to bring the private sector capital to bridge the SDGs and bridge the NDCs together in a blended finance with BNDES and the private capital. So that's our line with the capital mobilization. The capital projects, the parts of not the capital projects, but the problems of the projects, we created 2 years ago a big area, a big division in the bank, actually 3 divisions, to develop and to support projects in sanitation, renewables, urban mobility, to understand how we could develop faster and more climate resilient projects in Brazil. So we have a large pipeline, and the idea is to bring this capital, this commercial capital, to blend with BNDES capital to support these projects. And related to policies and transparency, we just launched last week here at COP the NDC portal, so which is a website portal, which is the main contributions of the bank for the Brazilian NDCs. So the idea is to enhance that next year, but is a kind of transparency that we'd like to. There's a kind of transparency that we'd like to inform, because at the end and the bottom line, you have to be able to communicate to society what are our contributions for the NDC. So in short, that's our activities for now.
Thank you so much, Julio, for giving us these 3 areas of challenges and activities that you are currently encountering. I would now want to give the floor to Alexander von Kapher from KfW, who is joining us online. Is the audio working? Yeah. Can you hear us? Oh, perfect.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to this panel and for the already very interesting statements. Yeah, Paris alignment is a very interesting issue and how to operationalize it. I think we've already a couple of events on this question during this COP and also during the last COP in Madrid when we had the first experience of an IDFC pavilion. And I mean, the subject has so many dimensions. Sorry, no, my phone is going. That's of course the problems of life. So sorry. I was saying the subject has so many dimensions that when you ask the question, how does your financial institution put the Paris Agreement into practice, you never get the same answer twice, right? I mean, the issues are pretty much the same, like already presented by Alexis and by the colleague from BNDES. But I mean, already Paris Agreement means different things for countries, for financial institutions, and for private sector companies. But even if you ask, let's say, 2 IDFC members or 2 multilateral development banks, there isn't one standard solution. There's not one clearly specified way how to translate the Paris Agreement into practice. Each of our institutions has its own specific context, in the historical background, or different administrative or political environments. So this is why I'm very thankful, or we as KfW are extremely thankful for the IDFC peers. And we will also listen to NOMSA and DBSA after my intervention as well. So since 3 or 4 years now, we've been able to share good practice with the IDFC peers and also with the multilateral colleagues, of course, to exchange on how to tackle these questions. And we are also very thankful to the think tanks like German Watch, I4CE, and not to forget, of course, CPI and also the New Climate Institute and many more, WRI and so on. So some of which are present here on the panel, because you come up with a framework like presented by Aki and by Alice, but also other studies that you've conducted before, sometimes especially for financial institutions, and you developed and showed us ways how to put Paris alignment into practice. Right. So when I want maybe to say something more specific about KfW is then maybe the special thing about why is KfW is also a special animal is, you know, KfW is composed as a group of different activity fields. You know, we have the development finance, which is maybe comparable to the French AFD more or less. We have also the domestic finance. We also have commercial finance. So it is a big group, and when you want to change such a big institution, you don't only have to change the processes or the strategic goals for the development part, but also for the rest of the group. And yeah, so 2 years ago we started on the group level a so-called roadmap sustainable finance. So a group-wise working group, which was working on the strategic target system. So now we've introduced SDG contribution, Paris compatibility, and also the aim of top positioning and sustainability ratings in the KfW strategic target system. And last Friday, here, two colleagues of mine presented at the IDFC pavilion the Paris-compatible sector guidelines of the KfW group, including strengthening of the transformative technologies in line with GHG neutrality, exclusion lists, or phasing out of GHG intensive technologies. You also have, of course, now strengthened ESG risk management on the KfW group level, impact measuring such as SDG mapping and GHG accounting. Well, we have also, of course, now we comply with EU taxonomy regulation and TCFD already mentioned by Aki. And last but not least, reporting and communication. Right, so all this now has been transformed into a new program and a new working group called Transform, with a capital SF in the middle of Transform, SF for Sustainable Finance. So this also will last, I think, until next year, and which will definitely transform KfW as an institution. And in addition, in the development finance part of KfW, so the KfW Development Bank, we have started 2-3 years ago a vast process called climate mainstreaming. Not a very original title, but one of our guiding principles was this bullseye, the green circle graphic presented by Alice. And maybe just 2 sentences on that. Before this climate, finance, climate mainstreaming, we stood maybe at the beginning of the arrow that Alexis showed. So we were doing definitely good things, at least some good things. Climate finance was already part of our, almost half of our overall portfolio. But the climate assessment was just a standard annex of the project appraisal reports sent to our ministry, the BMZ, or to our internal credit risk committees. But it was rather a risk avoiding approach. And now we've totally changed this, deleted this old annex. Instead, from the very beginning of a project idea in the design phase, now every portfolio manager at KfW has to undergo a process that guides you through potential climate risks in order to identify them, but also to identify, of course, corresponding mitigation measures to those risks. And if data collection is still needed for this analysis, you can still include this in a feasibility study prior to the financing agreement. Also, now you have to analyze the relevant NDCs. This is now to become systematic and show our contribution through the financing or through the project. You have to assess also now the GHG reduction impact as well as the carbon footprint. And we also now have to, of course, to provide sector-specific tools for the portfolio manager for that. So maybe to resume, a lot of things going on in parallel. Sometimes I also myself think for some questions KfW could have moved faster, no question. But as it was put a couple of times already by the former speakers, it is a journey. It is about change management in a huge institution. So I'm quite sure that we are moving towards the right direction. And also quite quickly in some questions, and definitely will now try to keep up the pace in other questions as well. And this again, this is what I like a lot about this IDFC exchange, and also the exchange and the challenges that we have with the think tanks. We quite among the IDFC peers, we're quite similar. But sometimes you see that maybe, IFD quite early published their subscribe to the 100% Paris alignment. Then also some other IDFC institutions maybe, overtook us in some questions. And then we of course, are challenged and try how to cope with the situation and maybe what to implement based on their experience at ourselves. And I stop here for a moment, but I mean, given what is currently happening in Germany, I suppose that the current, the incoming government will be definitely more greener than the last one. And also given that what was discussed and decided and announced during the COP in Glasgow, I think it's thrilling times also within KfW, and there's a lot of transformation going on during the next months still. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to you, Alexander. Now we would want to hear from Noam Zazondi from the Development Bank of Southern Africa. Thank you so much for coming here. We know it's very busy these days, but you made it. And yes, where does the DBSE stand in terms of Paris alignment? Can you give us some insights on that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. With regards to basically trying to align to the agreement, DBSA has learned a lot, particularly from the partnerships that we have with our partners, IDFC, the work that we do together with IDFC and the MDBs, the Mainstreaming for Climate initiative as well. So we have learned a lot. We have also shared some lessons with these partners. And generally, with regards to operationalization of the alignment itself, I would say maybe with regards to element number 1 on mobilizing funds for climate action, DBSA had already been involved around financing of renewable energy projects, particularly with the participation of the bank in the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Program of South Africa. I think it's a program that's world-renowned. There's a few countries that also want to learn from that program. So we have actually mobilized funds, our own funds, and partnered with other financial institutions, commercial banks, other development financial institutions like the Industrial Development Corporation of South Africa. So we do have, a good portfolio around, renewable energy-related projects. So much that at some point in time, when we're looking at the transition risk, we realized that yes, we are really at a risk because we have relied a lot around, energy-related projects. Now, in terms of the overall operationalization of the Paris Agreement, we have, as I've indicated, we have worked with our partners, maybe to begin with regards to defining the activities themselves. What is climate finance? We have gained a lot from the partnership we have with MDBs and IDFC, where we have the principles for mapping climate finance, this climate finance mapping tracking principles. So we've been actually using that to define the activities that we would regard as climate finance. As some of you may be aware, those principles are currently have been reviewed. We have participated as DBSA through IDFC around the review of those principles. And we are hoping that at the end of the day, as we try to align with the agreement, as we try to engage our colleagues in the bank, at least we have, definitions that are actually recognized worldwide. We have used the same principles around identification of those activities when we report for our climate finance mapping that we always send to IDFC, which is compiled into the IDFC report. So we recently as well, our government has put together its own taxonomy, because remember, at the end of the day, we also have to report to the government as we have to align to the national strategies. What we noted is that basically the taxonomy that the government has put together is actually also aligned to the international definitions, which is good for us because then our data that we provide to the government, we provide to IDFC or any other place where we report would actually be compatible. Another requirement around Paris alignment is the actual, accounting for the greenhouse gas emissions that are vetted when we finance the, climate projects. I would say that we've had challenges around that, particularly because when we compare ourselves maybe to other counterparts at IDFC, we realize that we are a little bit behind, but we have benefited a lot. All along, what we've been doing, because we also partner with the Global Environment Facility as well as the GCF, so we've been using their methodologies, the requirements that they have put forward with regards to GHG accounting, and as we develop projects and submit, we would actually follow those methodologies. But then we want to adopt our own methodologies, including GHG accounting, climate risk analysis as well. So what we are trying to do now, we have benefited, as I've indicated, for the climate mainstreaming initiative. They have actually partnered us with IFC. They have a CAFI tool that they use for GHG accounting and also just measuring the impact of climate-related projects. So we want to pilot that tool. We want to see what it can do for us as an organization. At the same time, IDFC is in the process of developing its toolkit to assist its members to ensure that those that do not have may look into adopting those tools. So we've got two methodologies that are actually, we are trying to pilot. The CAFI tool, we're hoping that the IDFC tool as well, when it comes out sometime next year, we will then be able to see which of these two we can adopt, maybe customize it to our own environment, or even in some cases we may decide that we actually adopt both of them if they complement each other, because as I indicated, they may have, be able to give you maybe information for different reporting targets. So with regards to GHG accounting, that is where we are. And then some few years back, we partnered with AFD. We looked at the risk around, transition. And from that report, the transition risk was very prominent, glaring. And as I indicated earlier, we depend a lot on energy projects. So we basically, it actually helped us to try to put together some initiatives that would help us to attend to this particular risk. So as such, we have actually developed our own transition risk framework, which was actually approved at board level. It basically guides us with regards to putting in funds for climate-related projects. As maybe I should indicate, as an economy in transition, a developing country, we just want to make sure that our transition is just. It ensures equitable access to resources, creation of jobs, and so forth. And I want to say that at some point in time, yes, we've had activists at our gates protesting around us financing coal-related projects. At some point in time, they were even protesting against the overall government renewable energy program, saying that it's going to actually cost jobs to implement this program. So I believe that in us trying to align to the agreement, we should also involve our stakeholders, create awareness around, for example, renewable energy projects. They are not really going to cost the country some jobs, but they're still going to generate more jobs, and people can participate equally in the overall process. Also, with regards to attending to climate risks, at the project level, when you're looking at the physical risk, we are also hoping that we are going to benefit from the IDFC toolkit that is going to be released sometime next year. And we also want to integrate that, mainstream it into our due diligence processes, so that we actually will be able to mitigate risks that are associated with climate projects. I think the main challenge, Paris alignment is relatively for us a new phenomenon. Therefore, we really would want to train our colleagues within the bank For example, when you're looking at climate risk analysis, you have to involve the overall team, the investment officers, ESG specialists, climate, and so forth. Therefore, we want to train everyone that is involved in the financing of the projects, the due diligence process as well. So I would say at high level, this is where we are with regards to trying to align to the agreement. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nomsa. Because we are running a bit out of time, I would first look into the audience and want to maybe open for questions from the audience, if there are any. Yes? Should we? There is going to be a mic here for you.
Yes, hi. George Thurston. I'm a professor of environmental medicine at the New York University School of Medicine. And I have two questions, two areas of questions. One is health. I see co-benefits mentioned here and there, but what mitigation measures you fund can make a big difference in their effects on health? I mean, I'm just trying to think of an example, but if you change over the fuel type from residual oil to electric, that would have positive health benefits. But if you get money and you seal up a building with caulking and windows, and then you increase the transmission of, let's say there's a pandemic, and you spread disease more by sealing up and making coffins out of these buildings, but you save energy. So, there's trade-offs, and where in here do we, use health outcomes as one metric? And then the second thing is accountability. There seems to be, in this COP system, no accountability. It's promises, and no accountability. But I think financial institutions can apply accountability, right? And where is the accountability here to say, did you really achieve what we funded you to do? Is that going to happen in the financial world? Because it doesn't seem to be happening in the political world. Thank you. I don't know who wants to take those. They're easy questions, but.
And do you want to respond directly, or should we collect some questions? Yeah, because there are more. Maybe we have another question, and then you can decide who wants to respond.
Yeah, hi. Rainer Axter from Adelphi. I have a question in regards to, because we have here 2 banks from developed countries and 2 from emerging economies. And what we sometimes find when we work with banks on these processes of climate strategies, that the systems are reversed sometimes. So there are sometimes risks for a logic from a developing country logic, which are not risks in a developed country, and the other way around. And I wonder if this is considered somehow also in the logic towards the Paris alignment, because it's not always the same. And we already hear that. Nomsa mentioned that there's a big element of the just transition, which might not be such a big scheme in other contexts. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I would like just to ask one very simple question. You know that public banks always played a very important role when there is a crisis. I mentioned, for example, the fact that the public banks play a very great role, for example, in the French electrification, rural electrification. Also, after the Second World War, KfW was created for that. And the first country who got the loan from World Bank was France, actually. It was the first country to take this loan. So now we are facing a climate crisis. So I think that there is a very important role for the banks to do that. And I would like to quote Paul Botnar, who's here at this very panel, and say that for him, only public money can make the investment at the pace and the volume necessary to address the climate change. So I would like just to maybe to ask you if we as bank are conscious about that, in fact, that we have to be at the forefront of making all these investments.
Hi, if there's time for one more question. I'm Petra Schell from Recourse. We're a civil society organization. I wanted to, given that AFD on the panel, I wanted to bring up some of the statements that's come out of this COP. So one of them is on public finance and getting out of fossil fuels, which AFD signed up to, was led by UK, and a number of other countries have signed up to it, including Germany. And a few others. And I just wanted to hear from you, what do you think is the significance of these kind of statements for your efforts in Paris alignment, and perhaps also hearing from the others if we can see some other DFIs joining the statement. And the other thing, I was really grateful that I've forgotten your name unfortunately, that you brought up the issue of the civil society and making sure stakeholders are on board and being part of the process. So I perhaps wanted to hear from the other ones how you engage with your stakeholders as well, in particular civil society and project affected people and so on. Thank you.
Oh, there's also a question from the online audience. So there is a question from Martin Voss. He says, thanks for the informative inputs. Is KfW in any way disclosing the results of climate mainstreaming and risk screening publicly? If not on a project basis, maybe on aggregate numbers? Thank you so much. So there are many questions. Who wants to take on the first question? So we go by round. So with regards to the health co-benefits, where do you see health co-benefits being taken into account? Yes, Alexis?
Thank you very much. Getting back to the 6 principles of operationalization of Paris alignment that were presented by Alice, we've tried to look at those principles and see where we stand and where we can make progress. The first objective is about mobilizing climate finance, and we're doing a fair share of our work there with having a 50% target of all of our commitments generating climate co-benefits. That amounts to 5 to 6 billion euros of climate finance per year. That's a lot. And one of the areas that we are now investigating is the quality of that finance and the sustainable development quality of that finance. It's not only about the climate co-benefit, it's about the broader sustainable development impact. And so what we've identified as next step, and we've started in some sectors, is make the connections with the different other major areas of sustainability that also need to be embedded in all of the climate finance that we are providing. And that includes making the connections with biodiversity, gender, but of course health and other topics. And these connections, they generate opportunities, but sometimes you have trade-offs. And that, I think, and that's part of another, that could help also fuel a possible response to another question. This needs to be handled in dialogue with counterparts and stakeholders. The trade-offs and opportunities, first and foremost, they are those of the different stakeholders involved in a given sector. And we see ourselves as generators of dialogue around those opportunities and trade-offs. For that to happen, you need to have information, you need to connect the dots, and then you need to bring people together to have a discussion about that. I was mentioning in my first remarks, if you remember the graph and towards the more ambitious side of the alignment journey, there's this issue of political economy. That needs to be part of the discussion. And I think when you have opportunities and trade-offs, this is where having a better understanding of the political economy around that and how you as a development finance institution can bring added value is something that is critical. And in this respect, it is very difficult to have a straightforward general answer to your question about the connection with health. it will depend, if there are trade-offs, it will depend on the local situation and the context and what the different stakeholders are discussing and how they are discussing it. Are they informed enough? Do we have the right people around the table to have the discussion? And promoting all that, I think, is one of the next frontiers that we are trying to overcome. In general terms, as I quickly mentioned, all of our projects are screened through a sustainable development analysis. And that includes, for climate projects, looking at all the other sustainable development impacts or, in some cases, issues that these projects might generate. And if the issues are too high, then we sometimes even withdraw from a project. If they are manageable, or of course, if they generate benefits, then we push for more dialogue in the case of trade-offs, and we try to promote the opportunities to, through a climate project, generate other sustainable benefits whenever we can. But this again is a journey, and there's a lot more to be done. But one of the potential ways to move forward again is to have a better understanding of what are these trade-offs and opportunities, and where are the different stakeholders, how are they positioning themselves in this discussion, and that understanding is key, I believe, for us to make the most impactful intervention. I'll stop there for that question on health.
Thank you so much. Do you want to add something, Namza? Or do you want to respond directly to another question?
To another question.
Sure.
Yes, I just wanted to share the ideas around what DBSA does with regards to providing services in the kind of rural communities. As a development bank that is wholly owned by government, we have a particular responsibility to work with our municipalities. Municipalities that are, metros, for example, we believe that they have the capacity, they have good balance sheets, and they can basically finance their own projects. And if there is any project that they would like to source funding for, they release a tender, we bid like any other financial institution, so we compete. But then there are those smaller municipalities, which we call district municipalities. So with regards to those, we've got a particular responsibility to assist them to put together infrastructure development plans. And those plans are 30-year plans. And what we try to do right now, looking at Paris alignment, we also want to integrate the climate-related issues in those infrastructure development plans. So we work closely with our planning colleagues, assisting them to put together, some kind of mainstream climate-related issues into those plans. And also, I want to mention that DBSA, having been given this responsibility, we also had to set up an infrastructure delivery division, which basically looks into implementation of projects at that level of municipalities, because we know that currently maybe the challenges are around capacity, the institutional setup as well in those municipalities. So this infrastructure delivery division basically, once the projects have been, the plans have been finalized, we help them to prioritize projects in alignment with the budget that they would have at a particular, time frame. And we basically also assist them to actually implement those projects. For example, if you're looking at EPCM contracts, we would want to take over that, responsibility and hold them by the hand until a particular project is actually delivered in that municipality that has got less capacity. We also want to make sure that the money is used for, the project that they were meant for. We also want to make sure that we prevent corrupt kind of activities, and that's basically the approach that we have taken with regards to delivering services in the rural kind of environments as DBSA.
Thank you for this addition.
Can I make just a compliment for the health
Sure.
question? But I think I can try to tie it to some other questions. Actually, we do not have a health evaluation itself, so focused on health, but our understanding is that we make a broader evaluation of the projects. So social environmental of the projects. And I would like to pick one example from Brazil. So we in Brazil are only, we only have 50%, 50% of sewage collected in houses. Okay, so what you're trying to do is to develop projects, good projects, to raise commercial capital, and together blended with a development bank public institution, concessional money, try to make these projects real. So the benefits for health are real. And you could not do that if you don't have this internal assessment about the projects, the internal effort to put the projects up, alive, to detail the projects. So that's one example I would like to give you. But you have a series of other examples who have positive externalities and positive good impact on people's health. So just to try to complement my colleagues' answer.
Thank you so much. I would also want to give a chance to our virtual panelists to answer the specific question to KfW on disclosure, on the numbers, but also maybe add the question that Petra said on what the announcements would mean for other development banks, as you also already touched upon this in your presentation earlier.
Okay, thank you very much. I will start with the KfW specific question, and then on the second one you just mentioned, so maybe then also giving the opportunity for the others in the panel to add something. So if I understood the question from the chat correctly, it was on what regarding the climate mainstreaming and the climate risks I mentioned. What does KfW disclose, right? So when you publish or aggregate impact, it is always the big question: how can you aggregate impact? And I mean, in terms of climate finance, it is quite easy in terms of mitigation. You have, of course, the GHG reduction in CO2 equivalent, and with regard to adaptation, you can maybe measure how many people have benefited from the adaptation measures. So we've had positive co-benefits. So this is also published on a completely aggregated way by KfW every year in all our financial engagements. When it comes to climate mainstreaming, I mean, this is also quite a process-wise or also administrative-wise process, and also the climate risks. It is a bit difficult to aggregate them because we don't weigh them maybe in monetary terms. And a climate risk in a certain area in Kenya has maybe nothing to do with another climate risk. I don't know, in southern Brazil, for example. So I don't see the point of aggregating them. But in that case, we have a transparency portal also on the internet where we publish information on our projects. So it's rather project-wise, and in that matter, you can also see, and it's also disclosed, what climate risk we identified in the specific project, and what are we going to undertake in order to meet those risks. And sorry, with regard to the second question, it is true. I mean, as I said, there has been now the decision or an initiative on phasing out of financing fossil fuels and non-abated fossil fuels and so on which has also been now signed by Germany. And this is will definitely have an impact on KfW. As you may have mentioned, Germany hesitated for 1 day or two in order before signing it. So there are discussions ongoing between our government and KfW. And with regard to methane and deforestation initiatives, well, we have to make sure that they are not just pushed to beyond 2030 or to 2050, because we have to act, of course, now. This should not be only initiatives describing the future, but we have to make sure that this will also be included in the NDCs, in the updated NDCs, and reported on as soon as possible. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I would want to give you the opportunity to respond to the question about the same question that Alexander just answered, because Petra just mentioned to the AfD. So what would this mean to the AfD?
Well, thanks. Indeed, I mean, getting out of fossil fuel finance has been on the table for many years within the IDFC and also the Finance in Common Summit, this summit gathering all of the public development banks of the world that was initiated last year in Paris, and then with a follow-up summit just a few weeks ago in Rome. And in all of these fora, of course, the issue of fossil fuel finance is on the table and has been on the table and continues to be on the table. When you look at the statements that have been made recently, including the Finance in Common statement, you see there that the Coalition of All Development Banks has clearly indicated that they have this objective of phasing out from fossil fuel finance. So the question now is, how and how fast? Some are advancing faster than others. It's to some extent context specific as well. Development banks are not the only ones deciding, of course. They work in a system, again, the system approach that I was mentioning, and there is so much they can do in some circumstances. The fact is that we see an increasing movement of phasing out that is translated concretely in public development banks policies. That is the case within AFD, and we have recently updated our exclusion lists to really include all fossil fuels, including gas, from what we will no longer finance, with a few exceptions for mini-grid, hybrid systems, for instance, and things like that. But these are really context and specific situations. I like very much the question you're asking about what is this having in terms of impact regarding our counterparts and those we are financing, and it does have an impact. When we started working on the alignment of our counterparts, starting with our financial intermediaries, of course, the issue of understanding what is the level of exposure to fossil fuels of our counterparts is central. It was also mentioned just at the beginning of the session when the recent study on the alignment of financial intermediaries was presented. It is one of the key elements that we look at when we work with these institutions. And so far we have an approach that aims to be context-based again, and having an understanding of that level of exposure, the trends of exposure. Is it decreasing? Is it increasing? Does the counterpart have a climate strategy? How far advanced is it in its own Paris alignment approach? And we try to take all of that into account to adjust the type of operations that we can, or the type of support or finance that we can provide to these institutions. So yes, it is having an effect and getting to that level of discussion. And that is needed, again, if we want not only us as development banks to be out of fossil, but if we want us as development banks to fully implement what our added value is. And our added value is not so much that whatever we have in our portfolio is clean and out of fossil. Our added value is to facilitate and contribute to the reorientation of the rest of the financial flows towards a greener, low carbon and resilient investment. And you were talking about accountability. Indeed, the financial sector is improving a lot in terms of transparency and accountability. As KfW mentioned, in our case, all of our climate projects are available as well through an open data platform. We recently released our first TCFD report, giving you even more information about how we're managing risks and so on. That's fine, it's absolutely needed. More mainstreaming of that is needed. But the question I wanted to raise, and this is a challenge, is that if we consider development banks' responsibility as one of helping the reorientation of all the flows towards Paris-aligned action, according to Article 2.1c of the Paris Agreement, if public development banks have a role there, then the accountability should also be on our reorientation effort and performance, and not only on what we are directly financing. And that is tricky. We're trying to put together elements on that. We are trying to partner with other think tanks, peers within the IDFC, within the Financing Commons Summit, with other financial institutions outside of the public space who are also struggling with these issues. And this is one of the key challenges that we need to overcome. It would help us tremendously to have better tools to build the accountability about what is really the core of our added value, facilitating the reorientation of the rest of the financial flows.
Thank you so much, and I think you also answered in part Mustafa's questions. So thank you so much to this excellent panel, and thank you so much to Alice and Aki again for their inputs on this panel. And I think we run over time, so thank you for bearing with us. And I hope you can resolve the rest of the questions maybe bilaterally. So thanks a lot again.